All right. Page 24. Futility and the Future. In 1898, Morgan Robertson published a novel about pride, greed, and stupidity. It was called The Wreck of the Titan, or Futility, and it described the maiden voyage of a transatlantic luxury liner named Titan. Although reputably unsinkable, the Titan strikes an iceberg and sinks with enormous loss of life. In 1912, the Titanic, a transatlantic luxury liner widely touted as unsinkable, made her maiden voyage, struck an iceberg, and sank with enormous loss of life. The following similarities pertained. Month of the wreck. Okay, there. Just you're gonna see the thingamajigger because I'm gonna put it up there, but I'll read it. Month of the wreck, April. April. Titan, April. I'm just gonna. Yeah, I don't know how I'm gonna do this. I'm just gonna read them. Month of the wreck. Okay, I got flustered. Why don't you just look at that picture? Absorb it in. Take it into your being. Memorize it, okay? I'm not going to read the fucking thing. I'm going to sit here. I'm going to sip my coffee. So I worked today. I think this is number 4 in a row of this book. Yeah. I'll go here next. On Tuesday, April 16, 1912, the New York Times announced the sinking of the Titanic. The disaster was strangely similar to a fictional tragedy published in 1898. All right. The death of the Archduke. The assassination of Archduke Francis Ferdinand of Austria at Sarajevo, Yugoslavia on June 28, 1914 was one of the immediate causes of World War I. In the early morning of June 28, the Archduke's former tutor, Bishop Joseph Lagny, woke from a terrible dream. I hate reading dreams. I dreamed that I had gone to my desk early in the morning to look through the post that had come in. On top of all the other letters, they lay one with a black border, a black seal, and the arms of the Archduke. I immediately recognized the latter's writing and saw at the head of the note paper in blue coloring a picture like those on picture postcards, which showed me a street and a narrow side street. Their Highness sat in a car. Opposite them sat a general and an officer next to the chauffeur. On both sides of the street there was a large crowd. 2 young lads sprang forward and shot at their Highness. The text of the letter was as follows. Dear Dr. Lagny, Your Excellency, I wish to inform you that my wife and I were the victims of political assassination. We recommend ourselves to your prayers. Cordial greetings from your Archduke, Franz Sarajevo, Franz Sarajevo, June 28th, 3:15 a.m. Trembling in tears, I sprang out of bed and I looked at the clock, which showed 3:15. I immediately hurried to my desk and wrote down that I had read and seen in my dream. In doing so, I even retained the form of certain letters, just as the Archduke had written them. My servant entered my study at 5:45 that morning and saw me sitting there pale and saying my rosary. He asked whether I was ill. I said, Call my mother and the guest at once. I will say Mass immediately for their Highnesses, for I have had a terrible dream. My mother and the guest came at 6:45. I told my mother the dream in the presence of the guest and of my servant. Then I went into the house chapel. The day passed in fear and apprehension. At 3:30, a telegram brought us news of the murder. Hold on. Bishop Lagny's dream was inaccurate in 2 details. There was only one assassination, and the officer was not sitting next to the chauffeur. He was standing on the car's running board because of an earlier unsuccessful bomb attack on the Archduke. Well, dimensions of time. That time, has many dimensions and a concept often advanced to account for prophecy. The gist of the idea is that which seems to unfold in a linear way, with the past becoming before the present and the present before the future, might, in another dimension, not be experienced sequentially. The past, present, and future could exist simultaneously. The concept that there are unfamiliar dimensions of time is most easily approached by way of those dimensions with which we are already familiar, those of length, height, and breadth. These, in turn, are best approached, quite literally, from a starting point which, geometrically speaking, has a location but no dimensions. It does, however, relate to figures with dimensions in the following way. If a point is moved through space, it marks a line with the one dimension of length. If a line is moved through space, it traces the figure of a plane with the two dimensions of length and breadth. And if a plane is moved in space, it traces a figure with the three dimensions of length, breadth, and height. We can also work backward from a three-dimensional body and find that the cross-section of the three-dimensional cube is a two-dimensional plane. That the cross-section of the plane is a one-dimensional line, and that the cross-section of the line is a dimensionless point. From this, we can infer that a body of three dimensions is the cross-section of a body of four dimensions, and that a three-dimensional body, when moved in a certain way, will produce a body of four dimensions. Then comes the question of what sort of body could a three-dimensional shape be the cross-section, and in what sort of new direction could a three-dimensional shape be moved to produce one of the four dimensions, since a movement other than up and down, backward and forward, or side to side would simply produce a larger figure, not one of a different dimension. The answer, of course, is the feature duration. For as soon as something ceases to endure, it ceases to exist. To the three familiar dimensions, then we should add duration in time as a fourth dimension. Ordinary three-dimensional bodies should therefore be properly described as four-dimensional, and a body with three dimensions must be defined as having only length, breadth, and height, but no duration. Is such a thing possible? It is, but only hypothetically. For in fact, the point, line, and plane do not truly exist as such. Any line that can be seen as breadth as well as length and duration, just as any physical plane has certain thickness as well as length and breadth. What movement then must a figure of three dimensions undergo to produce a body of four dimensions? We moved a plane in the dimension of height to produce a cube, so the movement of a hypothetical cube in the dimension of time should produce a real figure of four dimensions. What does movement in the dimension of time mean? As we said, it must mean movement in a new direction, not up, down, or sideways. Are there any other kinds of movement? For a start, there is the movement that the Earth's rotation imparts to everything upon it, and that puts even apparently motionless objects in motion. We can thus say that a three-dimensional body is the hypothetically motionless cross-section of a real body whose fourth dimension duration is inseparable from the motion that the turning world inevitably imparts to everything. Further inevitable motions are that of the Earth around the Sun, of the Sun around the center of the galaxy, and perhaps of the galaxy itself around some unknown point. Since any perceptible body is in fact undergoing all these motions simultaneously, we can't say that everything has these dimensions, though in a way that is ordinarily imperceptible, because motions and the dimensions they imply are only perceptible in a framework of time. They can be referred to as dimensions of time. If duration is one aspect of time, what might the others be? Among several possibilities, we can suggest appearance and disappearance, change and reoccurrence. Of all possibilities, only duration is perceptible. When we say that something appears, we mean that we suddenly note its existence. When something disappears, we note its lack of existence. We perceive no immediate condition of appearing or disappearing. In the same way, we talk of change, but actually only develop the concept as we perceive aggregates of characteristics that exist or cease to exist. And so we infer, but do not observe, the reoccurrence of sunset and sunrise, the passage of seasons, and the growth of a child. And yet things really do appear and disappear, change and reoccur, although not actually perceived to do so. They are, so to speak, hypothetical to us and must have their reality in other dimensions of time, just as the hypothetical three-dimensional body becomes real, that is, perceptible in the dimension of time we call duration. If access to higher dimensions of time belongs to one body, it is at least theoretically possible that it belongs, though invisibly, to all bodies. We can further assume that such access is by way of unfamiliar modes or levels of consciousness, and that the name we give to one of these is prophecy. Take out that uniformitarianism, got yourself a hot ticket. Man Overboard. J.B. Priestley, the English novelist and playwright, was fascinated by the philosophical and psychological enigmas of time and collected many stories from his friends on the subject. One of these was related to him by Sir Stephen King Hall, a fellow writer who had for many years been an officer in the Royal Navy. The event Sir Stephen remembered so vividly took place in 1916 during World War I. He was then serving aboard the Southampton, and on the day in question was officer of the watch. As the Southampton and the convoy she was guarding approached a small island off the Scottish coast, Sir Stephen experienced a premonition that a man was about to fall overboard. Thus prompted, he gave orders to prepare to rescue a man overboard, but since there was as yet no such person, his order was immediately challenged by the Commodore, who inquired, "What the hell do you think you are doing?" Sir Stephen continues the story. "We were abreast the island. I had no answer. We were steaming at 20 knots and we passed the little island in a few seconds. Nothing happened. As I was struggling to say something, the cry went up, 'Man overboard,' from the Nottingham, the next ship in the line 100 yards behind us, then level with the island. 30 seconds later, 'Man overboard,' from the Birmingham, the third ship in the line, and then abreast the island. We went full speed astern. Our sea boat was in the water almost at once, and we picked up both men. I was then able to explain to a startled bridge why I had behaved as I had done." One more. 20 years notice. In the middle of August 1918, Eugene P. Lyle Jr., an American journalist, wrote an article entitled "The War of 1938," which was published in Everybody's Magazine the following September. At that time, World War I was drawing to a close. The German Marne offensive had been halted in July, and the Germans had suffered major losses at Amiens on August 8th. Pershing was in command of the American troops, and by every indication, peace could not be far away. In fact, the war came to an end with the signing of the armistice on November 11th, less than 2 months after Everybody's published its curious story. In the article, Lyle offered a warning that unless Germany were crushed beyond all hope of revival, she would rise to plague the world again with a war of monstrous proportions. "And our soldiers climbing out of the trenches," Lyle wrote, "warned the politicians, God help you if you haven't let us finish our work." The article unfolds by way of flashbacks from the War of 1938 to the years immediately following World War I. Germany concedes defeat, repents, expresses a wish to join the family of nations. The war-weary allies are delighted and take her words at face value, but they are deceived. Germany begins to rearm surreptitiously, but on a massive scale. She stockpiles the raw materials of war: nitrates from Chile, copper from Mexico, iron from Sweden. Germany must not be merely efficient, but self-sufficient, her leaders say, and put the country in a state of permanent rationing. The years go by and rumors spread of the vast arsenal that Germany has secretly compiled and of the new weapons her scientists have developed. Still more alarming are the stories that the pan-Germanic gun clubs have been a successful front for the training of highly disciplined young soldiers whose sporting events are paramilitary maneuvers involving 50,000 men. And in addition to all these warnings, flying clubs were common. To skill in flying was added sham combat governed by rules and regulations to make for proficiency in the real thing. At last, Germany has an army of 20 million men equipped and ready for action. Europe, totally unprepared, falls in 3 weeks. England is taken by an airborne invasion, leaving the United States and the British overseas dominions to face the enemy as best they can. It is the Prussian night, the consummation, Lyle wrote portentously. Lyle was wrong about a few things in his scenario for the next 20 years. He did not, for example, foresee the harshness of the Treaty of Versailles would plunge Germany into the social and economic conditions that fostered, according to the hindsight of many contemporary historians, the rise of Hitler and German militarism. nor did he get the date of the beginning of World War II quite right, unless one regards the British and French capitulation to Hitler at Munich in 1938 as the event that made the war inevitable. And though Lyle did remarkably forecast the aerial invasion of England, the Battle of Britain, he was wrong about the outcome. And though it took Hitler more than 3 weeks to subdue mainland Europe, his blitzkrieg took Poland in 3 weeks in 1939, and in 1940 France fell after a 6-week invasion. In other details, Lyle was uncannily accurate. Arms and raw materials were stockpiles. Soldiers and pilots were trained in youth camps, gun clubs, and flying clubs. German scientists did develop the new weapons, and Hitler's intended victims were woefully unprepared. If Eugene Lyle's gift of prophecy had been recognized on this occasion, the world might today be a very different place. World War I was still being waged in September 1918 when Everybody's Magazine featured a chilling article forecasting the War of 1938. This illustration appeared on the cover. That's 15 minutes. You guys got lucky.